What if I told you there's a country with no standing army, no air force, and no navy? And it's not a tiny speck on the map, but a modern European nation? Welcome to Iceland. This small island nation in the North Atlantic doesn't just survive without a military, it thrives. And that raises a fascinating question. Why does Iceland have no army? Let's dive into the history, the geography, and the politics that make Iceland one of the most peaceful countries on Earth. The origins of Iceland's peaceful stance. To understand how Iceland ended up with no army, we need to go way back. Iceland was settled by Norse explorers in the 9th century, and for much of its early history, it was a fairly isolated farming society. There were no major wars, no empires to defend, and no need for a large military. In fact, for hundreds of years, Iceland was governed by a unique system called the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments. But Iceland wasn't always completely independent. For centuries, it was under the rule of Norway and later Denmark. During that time, military decisions were handled by the ruling kingdom, not Iceland itself. It wasn't until 1944, during World War II, that Iceland officially became an independent republic. But by that point, something unusual had happened. World War II and a new strategy. During the Second World War, Iceland found itself in a strategically important location, right in the middle of the North Atlantic. In 1940, British forces occupied Iceland to prevent Nazi Germany from taking it. A year later, American forces took over that role. This presence had a massive impact. After the war, Iceland decided it didn't need a military of its own. Why? Because it had the protection of larger powers, first Britain, then the United States, and later NATO. Instead of building an army, Iceland focused on diplomacy and defense agreements. It became a founding member of NATO in 1949, even though it didn't have a military. That's right, Iceland is the only NATO country without a standing army. So how does Iceland stay safe? The short answer? International partnerships. Under NATO, Iceland has agreements with countries like the United States, Norway, and Denmark to help protect its airspace and borders. For example, the US operated a military base at Keflavik from the 1950s until 2006, and NATO countries continue to patrol Icelandic airspace to this day. Iceland also has a coast guard, and it's not just symbolic. The Icelandic Coast Guard handles search and rescue missions, maritime patrol, and defense duties within Iceland's territorial waters. It even has helicopters, patrol ships, and radar systems. But when it comes to warfare, Iceland stays out of it. There are no tanks, no fighter jets, and no draft. Iceland has even been involved in peacekeeping operations, sending small teams of unarmed personnel abroad, but always in non-combat roles. Culture of peace. Part of the reason Iceland can remain unarmed is its unique culture and geography. First, Iceland is geographically isolated. There are no land borders to defend, and it's far from any major military conflict zones. Second, it's politically stable. Iceland has strong democratic institutions and one of the highest standards of living in the world. Crime is low, education is high, and trust in government is relatively strong. And finally, Icelanders just don't see the need for war. Surveys consistently show that most citizens support staying out of armed conflict and maintaining the country's military-free status. In fact, Iceland ranks at or near the top of the Global Peace Index almost every year. It's been called the most peaceful country in the world, and that's not by accident. Will it ever change? So, will Iceland ever create an army? It's possible, but unlikely. As long as NATO continues to offer protection, and as long as Iceland's neighbors remain peaceful, there's little reason to change course. Some politicians have brought up the idea of building a defense force, especially after global events like the war in Ukraine, but public support remains low. For now, Iceland will likely continue to do what it's always done: invest in peace, work with allies, and trust in diplomacy. And in a world where military budgets keep growing, Iceland stands as a quiet reminder that sometimes the best defense is having no army at all. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed, and let us know in the comments what your country's military is like.